Well, good morning, Center Pointe. Everybody doing well this morning? What a great time of worship with our worship team is just, they knock it out of the park week in and week out, and it's just so good. I love, usually for second hour, when I get a chance to speak on Sunday mornings, usually by second hour, I'm in a spot where I can step around and be in the back and just worship as part of the congregation, and man, this did a great job this morning. So we're super glad you're here. This morning we are in week 5 of our Legacy Family series, and we've talked about it before that regardless of the shape of your family, we are all shaped by family, and so because that's true, strengthening and resourcing families is really important to us. It's one of our core values here at Center Pointe. And so that's the reason we're in the midst of this series, and we've kind of moved through, had some really good messages over the last several weeks. And this week, message is titled Village People, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the idea of building legacy families kind of in the context of community. And if you don't know her, this is Tammy Phillips. She is our executive pastor of Next Gen Ministries. She's really kind of today's expert. I'm not sure why I'm here. I'm certainly not the eye candy, and I'm just along for the ride. And Tammy's going to do all the heavy lifting today, and we're just glad that she would come out and share with us this morning as part of this. So we're just going to have a conversation this morning. You're going to get to be really kind of version 5 of the Steve and Tammy conversation. We've gotten together over the last several weeks about 4 different times and just had this conversation, and God has refined it as we've had it each time. And so now we're just going to include you in the conversation. And so Tammy, why don't you dive in? As we talked over the last several weeks, there was a particular passage of scripture that had a lot of meaning for you in this for this message. And so why don't you dive in and share that with us?
Yep, and Sean started our series with the scripture on that week 1, I believe. It was from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 7 through 9. And it says this: impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. And so the very first phrase, impress this on your children, what Moses was talking about there was love the Lord. He'd said right before, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And if you even back up a couple verses from there, in verse 3 and verse 4, Moses says, hear, O Israel. And he says it twice, hear, O Israel. And so what he was talking about, this importance of passing on faith to the next generation, wasn't just to parents, but it was to everybody.
Right.
And that culture of that time was that of community. And so a house in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament was parents and kids and workers and grandparents and adult children with their kids and spouses. And so for us, if we want to transfer legacy, and if we want to transfer our faith to the next generation, we're going to need to do it through community.
Yeah, as we were talking over the last few weeks about this, when we first started talking about this idea, and in light of the title that Sean had put on this message, what came to mind for me was that phrase, it takes a village. Now, that it takes a village idea got really junked up with politics way back in the 90s when Hillary Clinton came out with a book and all that kind of stuff. And so immediately our political leanings and preferences attached themselves. And that whole discussion and that whole debate got junked up, and any value of that discussion got lost immediately in American culture. But the reality is that idea is not a new idea in American culture. In fact, it's an ancient idea, like you talked about. That's how it was. In fact, in many parts of the world today, it's still that way. If you go to the Middle East, our mission partners in the Middle East, when I visited them in Jordan, people build houses in levels, and you will see all kinds of buildings, house buildings, with rebar sticking out of the top. They are waiting for their son to get married, and they will build the next level, and the household will grow together, and they do that. And this idea, it takes a village. You could travel throughout the African continent, and cultures have variations on this sentiment that have been distilled down, now in American culture to this it takes a village idea. And even in American culture, we believe this, don't we? I mean, if you grew up in the same time that Tammy and I grew up, that's a nice way of saying if you're getting a little older.
Hey now, watch out.
And Tammy is older than me. I won't tell you how much. But
Really? You went there?
I did. Hey, I got to do what I got to do. But if you grew up in the same kind of time frame that we grew up in, and especially if you grew up in church at all, you know that we have believed that in American culture. When I was growing up in church, if I was sitting out there and my mom was in the choir loft, all it took was one look, and you better believe there was a whole village ready to build legacy in me, one way or another. Right? And we believe that. But the problem is that as time has progressed, our kind of our independence, our pride, and fragmenting cultural values have kind of broken some of this idea. But, it's one of those things where sometimes we forget as parents, and we start to think that parenting is the only relationship that's needed in building legacy. But the reality is, while parenting is about building legacy, parenting is hard. Am I right, parents? Amen. Parenting is hard. Now, I grew up in a home, Tammy, we probably grew up with some similarities in the way that we grew up and in the kind of families we grew up in. And I grew up in a home, great family, mom and dad, very solid, committed believers. Seemed like my dad was in the military. We moved a little bit, and everywhere we went, every church we were a part of, dad became an elder in the church. Mom was in a key volunteer role. They were youth sponsors when I was real little, all kinds of involvement. They were really stable, good parents by all accounts. But when I was in the summer between 8th and 9th grade, my brother was 6 years older than me. He had already kind of moved on from traveling on summer vacations. But we went on a summer vacation. We went every year from wherever we lived to this thing that went on in the Smoky Mountains. And we were on our way back from vacation to home in Virginia at the time. And we were on I-81 in somewhere in Virginia. And in the back seat of the car was this mound of pillows and blankets and headphones, and somewhere in the midst of all that was me. And I was zonked out, and my parents pulled into a rest area. And they pulled in, and they stopped, and they kind of leaned around. Steve, you need to go to the bathroom? Typical like freshman high school age. They can get a grunt, a groan, a moan, something. But it was like, no, not really. And so they got out and they went on in the restroom. Well, that woke me up enough to think, well, I probably should go ahead and go on in. So I did. You're with me. You're the only ones that are with me. Because when I came out, apparently my parents didn't know that I went in. And I walked out and the car was gone. And I thought, oh, that's funny. They just pulled the car around behind the semi-trucks. So I walked behind the semi-trucks and there was no car. So I literally had no capacity. This tells you what kind of family I lived in. It was a good enough family that my brain literally could not process and compute what was happening. I could not understand. And so I stood at that board where here's the map of the state and all the things that you can see. I read that board. Then I walked around the other side and I read that board. Then I came back around and I read that board. And I did that multiple times. And then I got tired and I went over to the other side of the rest area and I sat on a picnic table. And then in my head, in only a way that a freshman in high school boy's mind could work, I wasn't afraid or scared. What I was afraid of is that if somebody realized I was there alone, I was going to be in trouble. What does that say about freshman boys? We always think we're going to be in trouble, even when we didn't do anything wrong. And so I was afraid I was going to be in trouble. So I went back to the board and I read it a couple more times. And finally, I just sat down on the curb. And I have no idea, no concept of time. No cell phones back then. I didn't wear a watch. No concept of how long I was there. And then all of a sudden, up pulls the car. It happens again. I'm the one who's going to cry, Tammy. I almost broke down in first service over this. Pulls up our car, and out gets my mom, glasses coming off her face, tears streaming down her face, and she just wrapped me up and hugged me. And apparently they got in the car, saw everything in the back, thought I was there, and headed off down the road, and Mom went to sleep. And about 45 minutes down the road, a storm hit, and Mom woke up, and she reached in the back to grab something, and she said, Tom? Where's Steve? Well, now they had to get to the next exit and turn around and go back past where I was to get off an exit, to get on and get back up to where I was. And it was about an hour and a half that I sat there. And my mom, her biggest fear was that I was smart enough to try and figure out how to catch up to them. Fortunately for her, I wasn't. But man, even in a good family, parenting, it's hard, Tammy. It's really hard.
Yeah, and parenting is hard because relationships are hard, right? In general, relationships are hard. And so as parents, there's a couple reasons why parenting is hard. The first one is just we are emotionally invested in our kids from the moment they're born. We have dreams, we have hopes for them, we have desires for them, and we're emotionally invested in them. And we want the very best for them. And then we also buy into the fact that the things that our kids say and do and how they behave all reflect on us as parents. And then we let that define who we are.
Yeah.
And that gets really tough when they're teenagers and they make bad choices and they make mistakes. And we all ask
Tammy,
ourselves.
did your kids make mistakes?
Let's say, are they in this room? Well,
Mine did.
Yes, so
and they
did
are
mine.
in the room, so
Yes.
I'll just call them out.
Yes, they made mistakes. And there are times when Scott and I looked at each other and first I blamed him and said,
Of course.
It's your fault.
Of course.
And then, where did we go wrong? And so we're emotionally invested with our kids. And then another reason that makes parenting hard is that there are a lot of outside pressures on us. There are time demands. We have to balance work and family life. We have to decide how many sports can our kids play, how many activities can they be involved in, how much time can they watch TV. And it becomes hard to make intentional time with our kids. And then there's financial stresses. We want the best for our kids. We want them to have great opportunities, but raising a child in today's world is not cheap, right? Dad, who's with the daughter who's about to get married.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's hard. So there's
It is.
emotional investment that makes parenting hard, outside pressures, and then there's also just the simple fact that we have a sinful nature.
Yeah.
And that as parents, we are not perfect. And we have our own weaknesses and selfishness and pride and lack of patience and having frustration lead to anger. We deal with those things as parents. We have the natural resistance to authority. Yeah. Even as parents. It's not just our kids who have trouble obeying mom and dad who have authority, but we have trouble with that as well.
It's true. I was somewhere this morning or last night, was having a conversation with somebody and said, sometimes you just want to reach out and choke your kids, but you really can't because you look at them and go, they're exactly like me.
Exactly.
They're just like me. And so how can I get so mad at them because they're doing exactly what I would have done? And Tammy and I, as we were talking about this over the course of the last few weeks, and we were talking about this very point, it popped into my head just a memory of our son Caleb. And I don't know, he's probably 2 because at the time I don't think his sister was born yet, so he must have still been 2, but old enough and smart enough to kind of get a fix on things. And we were visiting some friends that we hadn't seen in a while, and so we'd gone out to dinner. And it was about an hour wait, but that's okay because we hadn't seen our friends, so we got plenty of time to talk and catch up. Says the parent of a 2-year-old who this is our first time parent of a 2-year-old. Like that kid is not going to sit still for an hour, right? But that's okay. There was a lawn out in front of the restaurant. It was a pretty night. He kind of ran around and played while we stood and talked. And there was a flower bed up against the restaurant. And at one point, he got kind of near the flower bed, and I just didn't want him going in there making a mess and things. And so I just kind of called across the lawn, "Hey, Caleb." And he looked at me, and I said, "Don't go in the flower bed." And he immediately went like this. And he looked at me and began to toe the line of the flower bed. Because it's in our nature. Our sinful nature says, you gave me a boundary. I'm going to see how close I can get to that boundary. It was kind of one of those things that it's like, it's really funny, but if he falls in that flower bed, I'm going to wear him out. Yeah, it's just part of our human nature, this sinful thing. And there's the fourth reason that parenting is hard is because things change, don't they?
Yep.
About the time we think we've got it kind of figured out, our kids grow and everything changes, and we're trying to figure out a whole new set of circumstances. My wife is fond of the quote that says, "Little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems." As our kids grow, it feels like the situations become more complicated and complex. The consequences are bigger. The solutions are more challenging. Their independence is growing while our ability to control it is dwindling. And things change, and life changes things that are out of our control. Just this week, 3 Center Pointe families who have teenage students, found themselves in hospitals in life-altering scenarios, 2 of which were completely unexpected, and one a planned but nevertheless major surgery kind of thing. And just that quick, life changes. And so parenting is really pretty hard.
Yeah, and Steve, I read a quote from a Parent Cube blog. I read blogs about parenting. And
sounds really hip, doesn't she? I read blogs.
I try
read
to
a lot
be
of
hip.
blogs.
Try to be hip, but anyway. So I thought I would share it with you because it's a really great quote. And here it is. "The jump from baby to toddler to graduation happens fast, crazy fast. Parents aren't really raising kids, we're raising adults. So when your child's born, you don't imagine them staying a baby for super long, even though we want them to stay young forever, right? But that doesn't...
maybe not forever, Tammy.
Well, yeah. Maybe 3rd grade. That's a great age. Anyway, so and managing this transition is so tricky. From phase to phase, it's so tricky. And so from parents, get out your Kleenex, because from the time they're born until graduation, you have 936 weeks, and that might sound like a big number, but it's gone in an instant. Yeah. And so from the time they're born, you need to think of, how do I imagine the end? What do I want for my child when they leave this house and are on their own? Who do I want my child to become? Not what do I want my child to do when they graduate, but who do I want them to become? What character traits of God do I want to instill in them and be intentional about as they're growing up through each of these phases? Do I want them to be honest? Do I want them to put others first? Each child's going to be different. And so you might have, if we say this in our baby celebration class, when a parent has a new baby, you need to write these things out for your kids. Who do you want them to become? And then that becomes your prayer from the time when they're super little, over and over and over again, until not really when they leave your house, but continued, because you're never going to not be a parent, right? Right. So you want to keep praying that same prayer.
Yeah, that's great stuff about just building legacy with intentionality. And sometimes we forget, and we think that parenting is the only relationship that's needed in building legacy. But the reality is that legacy is too heavy a weight to be lifted by just one relationship. Let me say that again. Legacy is too heavy a weight to be lifted by just one relationship. And Tim, you had some thoughts about how we can go about building legacy through community. So why don't you share a little bit of that with us? I know if you guys are like me, when I sit out here and listen to the message, there are times where I get stirred and I'm like, yeah, I'm with you on that. I need to do that. And the best thing is that somebody follows up with, and here's how, let me help you do that. So help us this morning.
Okay, so the first thing is super, super simple. It's just, parents, you lead the way. That if you are intentional, there are things that you can offer your children that no one else can.
That's right.
First of all, you know them better than anyone else. And most importantly, you love them better than anyone else and love them more than anyone else. And your child is made in the image of God, and just like you are. And so you just need to know that child, you can read all the studies about what's normal and development and all that kind of stuff and all the parenting books in the world, but God created your child as an individual. That's right. And God has placed you in the perfect spot to know the best thing for your kids.
Yeah.
So the first thing is real simple, just parents, you got to lead the way.
Yeah, and the reality is it's because God has positioned us like he has, that's what, it's not only just God-given positioning, with that positioning comes God-given responsibility. And so it is, as parents, it's our responsibility to be intentional and to lead the way and not leave it to somebody else to give the direction, right?
Yep. The second thing is to leverage the church. And so we want you to know that you are not alone on this parenting journey. And there's things that you can do to leverage the church that's going to help you build this legacy. And so first of all, you have to know and agree with the message that we teach your kids every single week, and that is being proclaimed here from the stage, that you have a Savior that knows you, created you, loves you, sent his son to die for you, raised him from the dead.
And that's where your identity comes from, right?
Absolutely.
Like, not because your friends or anything else around you or how you feel, but it comes from that.
Right.
That core truth, right?
Right. And that he wants a relationship
right.
with us. And so we want that message to not only be talked about from here, from the stage, from back what's happening in the back with your kids, but we want that message to be coming across and lived out in your home. And then the second thing is that you just come every week. Bring your kids as often as you can so that they can develop that sense of community that's going to help you build legacy in your home. And we believe that relationship is a vehicle for discipleship, for getting to know Jesus better. We also believe that relationship is a vehicle for this legacy.
Right.
And Paul was writing to the Thessalonians in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8, and he said this: "We loved you so much that we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well, because you had become so dear to us." So it's one thing to tell someone about Jesus, but it's another thing to walk with them, do life with them, and model to them what it means to follow Jesus on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that idea that for years, I think an earlier version of that truth used to get expressed as so much of what kids learn is caught, not taught, right? As we have relationship, they see us model it and they pick it up.
Right.
So we need to be intentional with it.
Right. And so because we believe in the importance of relationships, that's why we have small groups for our kids and for our students. And that's what we're so proud of, and that's what we love around here. And so for parents, we are widening their circle of influence. Parents, you're already in the circle, and you are the greatest influence on the life of your kids. But who else are we putting in that circle to help you? And so that's why we have small groups. And Sean said, circles are better than rows, right? And we believe that, and we want to provide a place for your kids where they're known by name and they feel like they have a place to belong. And so conversations and interactions that happen in that small group are things that can't happen in a big setting. And so that's why we have them.
Yeah.
And so if you have a small group, we have found a leader, and some of our leaders are not only adults, but they're teens.
Yeah, which is awesome. What a great way. It's like double building legacy. You're building legacy into your kids, and they're experiencing building legacy into others.
Right. And there's nothing better when there's a group that has like 2 leaders, one's an adult and one's a teen.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, I could go all day, talk all day about that,
Yeah,
how
yeah.
awesome that is. But here's the key. Small group leaders, they show up week after week, month after month, and they offer a consistent voice in the life of our kids, speaking truth, speaking challenge and encouragement.
And why do we need that voice, Tammy?
We need that voice because there's going to come a day when something's going to happen in their life and they need someone else to talk to. Why do they need someone else to talk to? It's because we are too emotionally invested, right? Which we talked about from the beginning. We're the ones, our emotions are high. We live together in the same house. We make the rules.
We want what's best for them, and we have a hard time of letting go of what we think that looks like. Right?
So they need another person that they can reach out to and talk to, someone who's going to be objective,
Yeah.
and someone who loves them for who they
Yeah,
are.
and maybe not just one someone else, right?
Yes.
Maybe some multiple someone else's.
Yes. That's the third thing that we want to talk about today. But parents, you lead the way. You leverage the church. And the third thing is to build an intentional team. And so this is kind of that widening the circle. You want to build a team. Part of our job as a parent is to find these influences and help surround our kids with other adults in their life. And this is not as hard as you think that might sound, because this can include family members. This can include neighbors. But the important thing that as a parent, that you are intentional of reminding those people, whoever they are, that their voice matters in the life of your child, that the things that they say to them, the time that they spend with them is impactful and important.
Yeah.
And there was research done by the Fuller Institute, and they took 500 college students. These are kids that grew up in the church, that were a part of youth group, and they wanted to see through that first 3 years of college how many kind of stayed with their faith and remained faithful. And out of the ones who remained in their faith, there was one common factor, and that was they had an intergenerational relationship with someone beside their parents. And then 46% of those kids in that group, they had five relationships,
awesome.
people that were speaking, truth into them, spiritually and personally.
Yeah.
And so I read an idea that I want to share with you. I wish I could be on stage here and say, Scott and I did this. This is kind of one of those things where I'd like to just rewind and do over. We're going to have that as parents. We want do-overs sometimes.
For sure.
But I thought I would share this with you guys really quickly because I thought it was a really, really good idea. There was a family that they took their son when their son turned 13, and they just simply asked him, who are men in your life that has made an impact on you? And I know you asked your kids this question not too long ago.
Well, I asked my kids this question this week. So
Well,
I just wanted to see.
it's never too late.
I didn't do it either, that intentionally, but we were intentional about our kids having people, and who do they have in their life. And so I thought, let me test this and see if who I think the influential people were in their life really were the influential people in their life.
Right. So this family, they asked their son. He gave them 5 names. They were 5 names that they thought he would give.
Yeah.
And so what they asked of these 5 people, they said, would you over the summer just do one thing with our son? Would you, ask him to come get ice cream with you? Would you go on a hike with them? Would you, you're taking a trip to Costco. Would you drag him along? Anything. It could have been anything. And when you're with their son, they ask them, would you share a spiritual truth, and would you just share like a life tip, some kind of life advice? And then what they did at the end, when their son had spent time with all 5 of the individuals, they had all those individuals over for dinner. They shared together what they had learned. There were many tears shed.
You're about to cry, aren't you, Tammy?
There were tears shed, and here's what was so great about that dinner for them. And I was just reading this, so this is crazy. But here's what was so great about what these parents did. They said to their son, "These 5 men are your team. These 5 men are people that you can go to when you cannot come to us. and they are for you, and they want the best for you. And so if you can't come to us, go to them. That was being so intentional.
And I think there's a great point in there that you're not looking to build a team of spies in your kid's life who are going to come back and report every little detail of what they do. What you're looking for is to build a team of people that you know and you trust to stand in your place in those key moments, that you know that the things that they're going to hear and that you're trusting them with that treasure, and they're going to give back the kinds of things that you would give. And if something rises to, they'll give you a sense of that you need to know, but you're going to trust them in that place, I think is really key.
Right. And you might be thinking 5 people, wow, that is a lot. It doesn't matter about 5 people, but the church has already given you one person on your team and their small group leader. So who else? Who else? It could be a family member. It could be someone, your friends that are adults. They could be part of your team.
Yeah, if you're ever with your friends, this is graduation party season. So you're at a graduation party and you're sitting around the table with your friends and your kid is hanging out with you. If your child seems to always gravitate to spending time in those kinds of social settings around you and your friends, you've probably identified, without realizing it, somebody that they're comfortable with and that they respect and that they might listen to as well. But there are other places, coaches and...
Yep. So if you want to identify who could those people be for my kids, this is what you could do. First of all, you could simply ask your kids.
Genius.
Ask them, who are the adults that you know that you'd like to get to know better? Who are the adults that you think are just cool? I don't even know if people use that word anymore.
I don't know. We said hip earlier, and I'm pretty sure nobody uses that word either. So
anyway, ask them. It could be a private lesson teacher. It could be a coach. It could be a teacher. It could be, like we said, one of your friends. If your kids are older, you can ask them, if you had a problem with maybe grades, or if you had a problem with dating, if you had a problem with stress, who could you go to if you can't come to me?
Who would you feel comfortable with, right?
Who would you feel comfortable with?
Yeah.
And so, how do you identify them? Just ask your kids.
Yeah. And what you just said, maybe if your kids are older, goes back to that thing, it's never too late. Doesn't matter. Just because your kids aren't toddlers doesn't mean you can't engage this. I read a quote somebody posted just this morning from C.S. Lewis. You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. It's never too late to engage, right?
And when you ask your kids these questions, you're helping them start to think, what is my safety net?
Yeah.
Who else could I go to? And start planning that in their mind.
So after you identify this team, how do you go about nurturing that a little more intentionally?
It's a good question. So especially if they mention someone that maybe you don't really talk to a ton, like maybe it is a coach or a private lesson teacher, and you kind of drop your kids off. And so here's what I would do. I would just simply go to them and say, I was talking to my child, and they mentioned your name as someone that they really look up to. And so here's what I would do then. Just say, here's my kid's game schedule. Would you come to a game maybe? And you might not have time to do that, but could you write them an encouraging note? Or if your kids are older, could you send my son or my daughter a text of encouragement just now and then, because it means so much to them, and you're important to them.
Yeah, and I think you'll find, that might seem a little intimidating, but I think you'll find that when you go to other people and say, hey, I don't know if you know this, but I was talking to my kid and they said that you're somebody they really look up to and respect, that is going to be something that draws them in, that they feel honored and privileged. I know that's the case if somebody ever says something like that to me. I feel honored and privileged, and now I'm part of, I want to be part of that team.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So if you intentionally nurture that stuff, what are we hoping we're going to get out of that? What do we think that's going to benefit for us?
Right. So the long-term benefit is that when you widen your circle, when you build a team for your child, you're building a safety net for when they fall. And I didn't say if they fall, I said when they fall, because they will fall as they get older. They're going to make choices, and you want to provide that safety net for them so they can go and they can talk to someone else.
Yeah, and it's important, build it before they get there. If your
Yes.
kids are young, start building it now. While they're little kids and have little problems, build a safety net that it will grow. And by the time they're big kids with big problems, there's a big, strong safety net.
Yeah. And a couple months ago, we had a milestone celebration called Middle School Move. And we asked, the parents came and they were supposed to ask teachers, people who had an influence on their child's life to write them a letter. And I walked around the corner and at a table in the connections area, the cafe area, was a grandmother and a grandchild. And this granddaughter was reading letters from her teacher, from her counselor at school, and she just had tears coming down her face of the words that were being spoken to them. And those words matter, and those words are that she's going to hold on to. So another long-term benefit is when you intentionally have people speak into your kid's life, they're going to hold on to it, and they're going to kind of deposit that in their bank that they're going to refer to later down the road.
Yeah. So I think you said, as we were talking about this, that you have a couple of challenges that you want to share with us today. So go ahead, buckle up, get ready. Here it comes.
Here we
Tammy's
go.
going to challenge us.
They're pretty simple.
Okay, good.
The first one is that if you're a parent, have a conversation with your child and just say, who is one person that you'd like to get to know better? Who's one person that you think is cool, or whatever word you used now? Ask them who that person is, and then schedule a time with them this next month. Somehow connect them together. Invite them over for lunch. If you know them really well, speak to that person and say, could you do something with my child or my teen? So that's a challenge for parents. And I'm going to give another challenge, and Steve, you can speak into this, but if you are not maybe you're a parent like Steve and I, where our kids are older now, or maybe you're
What are you saying, Tammy? Are you saying we're old?
Well, you said I was older, so.
I did say that. Well, hey, we're both old.
Or maybe you're a young couple with no kids yet. My challenge for you today is every person in this room can be on someone's team.
Yeah.
And you might not ever want to be a small group leader, and you might not have time for that, and that's okay. But you could still be on somebody's team who needs another voice in their life.
It's about building those intergenerational relationships that help us shape legacy. And as Tammy and I were talking about this over the last few weeks, it's one of the things that came for me as we were talking about kind of where we are in life with kids in college or kids out of college and getting married and going on their own, launching into their own season of their journey, is the idea that it occurred to me that we use the term next gen, Tammy and her team, the next gen team, next generation. We use that as a term, and we think about high school kids and junior high kids and younger kids. But you know what? For a lot of you in this room that are like me and Tammy, our next gen is not just high school kids and younger. There's a group of adults. We tend to section in church life next gen and adults, but there's a group of adults that lie between where we're at and those kids that are in high school and younger. And they're on the verge of launching into life, starting, getting married, first jobs, laying the foundation for their financial future to build a godly financial plan and framework in their family. They're having first kids. Maybe they've got multiple kids and they're now into first kids in school or navigating activities or whatever all those stresses are. And there's, the top end of that, they're starting to deal with suddenly boys are not grossed out by girls, and girls are probably still think boys are stupid, but they're not as grossed out by them. And all those phases that, we went through as parents, that where we are now, our next gen is a generation of adults who need us to have intergenerational relationship, to walk with them, to help them navigate, to let them know it's going to be okay. I'm here with you, and I've been there before. And I think that's just critical. And the idea, as we talked about it, that there's never a season in life where you either don't need or aren't needed as a third voice, as a being part of the team of building legacy. And I think that goes back to where you started with Deuteronomy 6. That's why Moses was speaking to the whole community of the nation of Israel, several million people, and he's saying, not just mom and dad, he's saying together as a community, following the one true living God, if you want to transfer this faith, if you want to build legacy in the generations to come, then you need to do these things together in the context of community, right? Mm-hmm. So we've got a few resources, and Tammy's going to share them this morning. And what we're going to do after we dismiss this morning, we've got 3 resources. And so without any kind of raucous stampede, the first parent who comes up who has kids kindergarten and younger, we got a resource for you. The first parent who comes up who's got kids in elementary school, we got a resource for you. And the first parent who's got a kid that's a junior high or high school student, God bless you. We've got a really cool resource for you. So Tammy, tell us about those resources before we wrap up.
Yep. So we have 2 books. One is called Don't Miss It. This is a super easy read, and it'll help parents be intentional with the time that you have with your kids.
And it's the skinniest, smallest book because parents of preschool age kids, you don't have time to read a thick book.
That's true. Parent every week like it counts. That one.
Yeah.
This one, Parenting Beyond Your Capacity. This really talks about that, widening the circle and creating a team. So this is a great book, great resource for anyone. And then this last resource
is really cool.
It's really cool. It's called the With You box. And in this box, it's got cards in it that say, here's one thing that I hope to be true for your future. There's a set of those. There's a set of, here's one thing that I know that's true about you. There are cards that say, I remember when, and somebody can write about their experience with your child, and then something I've noticed about you. And so the great thing about the purpose of this box is that you take it and you have your intentional team and you pass these cards out from time to time and you collect things in this box. And then you can decide as a parent when you want to give this to your child. Yeah. Maybe it's when they're having a really hard time in high school or junior high, or maybe it's when they graduate before they go to college. So this is a great resource. But the really cool thing is that one person's going to get this box today, but anybody can create a box, right? And I have the downloads of the cards for free that I'll make available to everybody. So you could print them out and you can give them away to your team.
Yeah, so when that notification comes up, popping up on your phone this week from the in the Pointe app, or you see it on Facebook, it's not, oh, they're bugging me again to remind me of what I heard in the sermon. Mm-hmm. It's, hey, we're going to make resources available to you, and there'll be links to all that stuff, right? Yeah,
there'll be links to all these things.
That's great.
For you today.
That's great stuff. Yeah. So, and was that right? Is Tammy not phenomenal about this stuff? Golly. What I was hoping she was going to say is that this With You box, you carry it with you, and when your kids are having problems, you just rub it, and a little Tammy Phillips genie pops out and solves it for you. Right. But it's even better than that, I think. So it's great. We just really care about families, and together we want to be a church that walks together and builds legacy. And so one of the things I know we've talked about, along with the resources over the last several weeks, there have been the big chalkboards out in the coffee area that you could write some different things on. There's another one of those this week, and the question is,
who has impacted you?
Who has impacted you? And so stop by and write something there. And then find time to take a look at these things as they get put up on the wall, and just hear some of that stuff. It's really good, impactful stuff. And so we're just thankful you're here, and we're glad to be in partnership together. Tammy, why don't you pray for us? And then we'll be dismissed. As we dismiss, remember, if you want to be part of the Reach Out Lakota food drive, which is a great opportunity to build into your kids by doing that together. Yesterday at Kroger, I ran into a Center Pointe person who's a grandma, and she was with her grandchild shopping just for the Reach Out Lakota food drive together with her grandchild. You want to talk about building legacy. That's awesome.
That's a team right there.
That's awesome. And so you can do that. There's info on the website, the app, or the info is right out in the lobby with bags and shopping lists for you. And also, if you expressed interest in a summer group, or even if you didn't and you're interested in a summer group, the cards on the chairs, grab one of those, fill it out, and make sure you give it to us today. Summer groups start this week, so we want to make sure you get information and get hooked into those. So why don't you pray us out, and then we'll be dismissed.
All right. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for creating us for community. Thank you for wanting to have a relationship with us. And Lord, we thank you that you place others in our lives that have Jesus' skin on, that model for us your love and all the qualities that you have. Lord, we thank you for your Son. We thank you for what he did for us on the cross. And Lord, I just pray that we just live that message out of your great love. I pray that today that parents will leave here thinking about who can be on their child's team. And I pray that every person in this room can think, whose team can I be on? And cheer on and encourage and love. Lord, we just thank you for us all being your children and for us being your sons and daughters. We love you, and we pray all these things in your Son's name. Amen.